Hello there, friends and enemies. My name is Toxy, and welcome back to Weird Deck Techs. This week, I'm going to be talking to you about another Thunder-based archetype that used to see quite a bit of play, especially in the casual scene, but as of recent years has not seen as much play as it used to, and that archetype is Watts. Watts are a very interesting archetype because they are all about two specific things. They have quite a bit of gimmicks to them, but their two big gimmicks are that they can attack directly and that they do certain things when they get destroyed. There's a third kind of less important effect that the archetype has about attacking twice per turn, but I personally don't feel like that is necessarily the highest part of the archetype. Overall, this is an archetype that I've specifically been interested in for a number of years, but I've never wanted to actually make the deck in full. So getting to make this deck for this week was super good. And that's enough of me rambling, so without further ado, let's take a look at the Watt deck. So here we have the Watts, a deck that I actually had a lot of fun making, and let's go ahead and look at the deck list here. So here you can see we've got a pretty balanced deck, a lot of monsters, a lot of spell and traps, and then an extra deck there. So let's go ahead and go through the deck and then we'll talk about it. Starting strong, we have 3 copies of Watt Giraffe. This card can attack your opponent directly. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects until the end of this turn. So a static, stopping effects by getting that attack through. Watt Pheasant. This card can attack your opponent directly. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, select one face-up monster on the field and remove it from play until the end phase of this turn. So quick removal for 3 copies of that, just to get stuff out of the way there for a quick moment. Watt Squirrel. This card can attack twice during each battle phase. If this card battles, negate the effect of the monster it battled after damage calculation, including in the graveyard. Quick negation, a little bit slower negation than the Watt Giraffe, because it does require you to battle a monster specifically, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. 2 copies of Watt Squirrel. 3 copies of Watt Kiwi. Watt monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle while they are attacking. So obviously this is going to be one of the most important monsters in the deck. It just keeps your monsters alive and healthy while they're attacking, allowing you to, get like Watt Squirrel's effects out there without having your Watt Squirrel just get destroyed automatically. 2 copies of Watt Barrix. While this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, discard 1 random card in your opponent's hand. Little hand play there. 1 copy of Watt Mole. This card can attack twice during each battle phase, and if this card attacks a face-down defense position monster, you can destroy that monster immediately with this card's effect without flipping it face up or applying damage calculation. I figured this is something that we probably aren't going to run into a whole lot, so that's why we're only putting Watt Mole at 1, but it is quick removal for a monster, which is really good. 3 copies of Watt Dragonfly. If this card is destroyed by your opponent's card, either battle or card effect, you can special summon 1 Watt monster from your deck. Really good, not just a fetch monster, but a special summon fetch monster, which is much better than getting them back into your hand. 2 copies of Watt Fox. If this card is destroyed by your opponent's card, either battle or card effect, your opponent cannot special summon a monster or activate spells, traps, spell trap effects, or monster card effects for the rest of this turn. It's a quick lockdown for your opponent. So you obviously want to bait your opponent into attacking this card by putting it like face down or something like that, or getting an equip spell in there that makes it so that your opponent can only attack Watt Fox. Lastly, for monsters, we've got 3 copies of Watt Lemur. If this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by your opponent's card, either battle or effect, your opponent cannot conduct their battle phase during their next turn. Very good for monsters. Moving into spell and traps, we've got 2 copies of the continuous spell Watt Scene. When a thunder-type monster you control inflicts battle damage to your opponent, gain life points equal to the damage inflicted. Definitely balances out the amount of damage you're going to be taking from some of these monsters for just attacking your opponent's monsters like Watt Squirrel, and that's why this card's in there. 2 copies of Watt Adjustment. Equip only to a level 3 or lower Thunder type monster. It gains 800 attack, also its effects are negated. Each time it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, draw 1 card. So I'm a little flip-flopped on this. I like that it's an equip spell, gives your monster 800 attack, and whenever it inflicts battle damage, draw a card. The one thing that's a downside to me is that it negates effects, but there are ways to get around this that we'll talk about in a minute. 2 copies of the field spell Watt Castle. Any monster that attacks a Watt monster loses 1,000 attack after damage calculation. That one's self-explanatory. 3 copies of Watt Key. Face-up, Watt monsters you control can attack your opponent directly this turn. I feel like that's another self-explanatory one. 3 copies of Watt Train. Add Watt cards with different names from your deck to your hand, except Watt Train, up to the number of Thunder monsters you control with different names. During your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard. Special summon as many Watt monsters as possible with different names from your hand. You can only use each effect of Watt Train once per turn. This has got to be one of the best fetch spells, search spells that I've seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! Just for a specific archetype. Mainly because, especially if you can get a bunch of Thunder monsters out there, you're just fetching anything that you want. And even if you aren't getting a bunch of Thunder monsters out there, it's better than grabbing just a monster. You can grab any Watt card from your deck, and I think that makes this a very powerful fetch spell. Finally, for the main deck, we're moving into traps. We've got 1 copy of the continuous trap Watt Cannon. Once per turn, when a level 4 or lower Thunder type monster is normal or special summoned to the field, inflict 600 damage to your opponent. This one's self-explanatory. I kept it at 1 because it's not going to be doing much. 3 copies of the counterspell Watt Cancel. When your opponent would normal or special summon a monster, discard 1 Watt monster and negate the summon and destroy it. A resident negate spell for summons. Really negates the need to have like Solemn Judgment or Solemn Strike in your deck. Because then if you want other counters, you can go ahead and focus specifically on stuff like, impermanence or something like that. Ending off the main deck, we've got 2 copies of Watt Keeper. Select 1 level 4 or lower Watt monster in your graveyard, special summon that monster from the graveyard, and destroy it during the end phase. A little bit of graveyard recursion there that we love. Moving on to the extra deck, we've got 1 copy of Watt Hydra. It requires 1 Watt Tuner and 1 or more non-tuner Thunder type monsters to summon. This card can attack your opponent directly. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, choose 1 card in your deck and remove it from play. Add that card to your hand during your second standby phase after activating this effect. The reason I kept this at 1 is just because I don't see the real reason to remove something from play and then add it to your hand 2 turns later. Maybe that's just me, but it kind of feels like a really slow version of Gold Sarcophagus. And lastly, for the deck as a whole, we've got 3 copies of Watt Chimera. It requires 1 Watt Tuner and 1 or more non-tuner Thunder type monsters to summon. This card can attack your opponent directly. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, place 1 random card from your opponent's hand on top of their deck. I think this is a really good stall effect for a boss monster. I think that's what makes Watt Chimera a little bit of a strong boss monster for this deck. I feel like it could be a little bit better, but overall, I think that that's a good effect for the extra deck. Now, having taken a look at the whole deck as a whole, as I've built it, what do I think about this deck and how would I play it? I definitely think that this deck could hold its own if built correctly. I don't think it's going to be topping any like tier 0 decks, but I do definitely think if you took a deck like this to locals, you could get somewhere with it if you built it correctly. That being said, I think it could benefit from having a card similar to like Share the Pain, and then to balance that out with a little bit more graveyard recursion, maybe a Watt monster that brings other Watt monsters back from the graveyard. I feel like that would be a little bit better of a step. Maybe give that to like another Synchro monster and make it a little bit better of a boss monster. Maybe give it 1 more effect, but I don't know. That's just my feelings on the deck. Now, this deck feels a little bit more solid than Battery Man. I really liked how Battery Man was set up, but Battery Man felt a little bit slower than this deck does, and I feel like this deck could do a lot good with a lot of similar support as Battery Man, but not exactly the same. I would, of course, put Maw Hunter and Paw Hunter in this deck, as well as possibly Thunder Sea Horse, because I feel like it could be a good job of searching out, you know, any Watt monster. And not just Watt monsters, but also Paw Hunter and Maw Hunter if you need those. And I didn't say this with the Battery Man deck, but I cannot overstate how important a card like Thunder Dragon's Discharge is for any archetype that you're playing that is just straight Thunder type monsters. Thunder Dragon's Discharge goes against cards like Skill Drain, and it goes against cards like Ash Blossom. It goes against the Watt Gun here, Watt Adjustment. It's just a really decent card for Thunder decks overall. Also, as I said before, I really like Share the Pain. If I were to build this deck, I would probably add a little bit more Graveyard Recursion and then have some copies of Share the Pain in there. That being said, overall, I do really like this deck, and I think this deck does a good job of holding its own at least a little bit, especially if you're playing in casual circles. That being said, let's go ahead and get back to me. And that was Watts, a very electrifying type of deck, if I do say so myself. Let me know how you feel about the Watt deck down below. Do you feel like it's pretty good like I do, or do you feel like it could be better, or do you feel like this deck just could never make the cut? Personally speaking, this deck build was fun for me because I've been deck building a lot this week. I've built a couple decks for friends that are just getting into Yu-Gi-Oh! I've been deck building in preparation for Power the Elements, and I've just been fixing up some of my old decks along the way. And it's just been one giant fun deck build fest this entire week. That being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, drink your water.